Bring this on, so you guys make sure to mute your phone during the presentation. Leave the question answer for after the session is over, if you like. I open like to have a free open session, so I mean let's leave to the end, so that way Jim can do all his material first. Okay? Appreciate your help, Elias. Thank you very much for jumping in and assisting me. Jim, thank you very much for being a speaker tonight. I'll talk to you guys in about an hour. Take care.
Oh, thanks to you, man. So, good evening, folks. Tim.
Elias, no, I cannot.
Hi, Jim. How are you? So, folks, good evening. 7 o'clock right now. The recording has started. Today, Jim Christopher is joining us and is going to be, delighting us with a PowerShell Gotchas session. Jim is a PowerShell MVP. Has been an MVP for 3 years. Has a lot of experience, folks. Also plays the guitar, as you can hear. For the last 18 years, Jim has been, involved in the developing, the software industry, mainly in the aerospace education.
If anyone listening to this presentation can actually hear my voice right now. Quick verification as to whether or not you guys can see the welcome slide. Welcome to Florida PowerShell Users Group. Can you guys see that right now?
I can see it, yep.
Yes, I can see it.
All right. So, back up a little bit. Yeah, so this is the Florida PowerShell Users Group. I'm going to go ahead and give a brief introduction. I think this is my second or third time presenting to this group virtually. So it is being recorded, so I will watch the language, and you should too. The topic tonight is PowerShell Gotchas. We'll get to that in just a few minutes. I have a couple of things I want to go over first. And again, this group is run by Max Trinidad, a PowerShell MVP and really great guy. You can contact him through these various contact means listed on the screen, but you probably know that already. And finally, here are your sponsors for your local user group, and you should definitely partake of their digital and physical wares. All right. Now, I am presenting my desktop. It should come through shortly. So, can you guys see my root slide? Jose has no audio. I don't know what to tell you, Jose. All right, good. So, my name's Jim Christopher, and I run a very small software development outfit in Charlotte, North Carolina, named Code Owls LLC. We do a lot of automation, and we do a lot of systems integration. So PowerShell comes into play quite frequently in those two areas for me. So I'm a PowerShell MVP, but like I said, I'm a software developer, so it's kind of a, that group is a real mixed bag. You get a lot of IT pros, and I'm more of the sort of the DevOps mindset. I do a lot of tooling, so that's why I have the MVP, I think. Anyway, here on the screen is a bunch of contact information for myself. If you have any questions about what you're seeing tonight, or any questions, generally speaking, about PowerShell or software development, don't hesitate to reach out and contact me, because I'm more than happy to help you. So, another thing that I wanted to bring up is this book, the PowerShell Deep Dives. I don't know if any of you have seen this yet, but this is a collection of basically what I would call really long blog posts from various PowerShell experts, so myself included, and they sort of edited it together to form this massive compilation of just really interesting stuff. So in any of the proceeds that Manning gets from sales of these books actually go to an organization called Save the Children. So it's a completely non-for-profit effort. Everyone donated their time. And again, if you purchase a copy of this book, you'll have some really great information. Everything from developing for PowerShell to using WMI and sim commandlets, you name it, it's in there. It's a really interesting book, actually. So again, all proceeds go to charity, so keep that in mind. Well, I was going to say this holiday season, but that's kind of past now, isn't it? So, but I'm sure there's someone special on your list who would absolutely love to just get this book out of the blue as a present. Now, I'm going to talk about a local user group here in Charlotte, North Carolina. This is the Charlotte PowerShell Users Group. If you are ever in town and you want to hook up with other PowerShell aficionados, just go to this URL, and you can actually, if you join the group, you can schedule your own meetup. And Charlotte's kind of a sprawling place, so it can be difficult to to get people together. So I like to encourage people to schedule their own meetups. Like if they're in the Lake Wiley area and can't get down to the south side of Charlotte, let's say, they can find other people in the area to help them, and they can schedule their own meetup and that kind of thing. So. And no, it's not. There's a question from Greg. We typically don't broadcast our meetings. So, it's interesting. Our meetings, they're not like what you're going to see tonight. Tonight is me presenting, knowledge that I've acquired over the last couple of years. What we do at these meetings is mostly, I guess what you would call script club. And so sometimes we'll have a problem, like a little scripting game, right? We'll have a little problem that you can solve in like an hour. And then people will present their solutions, and sometimes we'll pick a winner, or sometimes, it's just a contest to see who can get to the solution first. Other times people will bring in their own problems from work that, they're allowed to share, and they need help with things. And so, we'll just sort of round table it and help them get their work done. So it's more of a learning experience, hands-on kind of learning experience than sort of your typical user group where someone's presenting and those kinds of things. So we do have presenters come sometimes, but it's very infrequent these days. And speaking of the user group, we are hosting an event next month, and I want to tell you a little bit about it. So on February 8th, we are hosting PowerShell Saturday number 007, and this will happen at the Microsoft campus in Charlotte, North Carolina. If you're anywhere near the area, I would highly recommend that you investigate the option of going. So if you go to the URL in this slide, powershellsaturday.com/007, you can learn more about the event. we have these, a really great group of speakers coming to share knowledge with you. In fact, like the first name in the list here is Sean Kearney, and he's flying in on his own dime from Ottawa just to share his knowledge. So it's a really great experience. And Ed Wilson, Microsoft scripting guy, Ed Wilson, AD expert Ashley McGlone. And it's really interesting. We have some security experts coming as well, Matt Graver and Chris Campbell, who are part of the POSHSec group, and they're going to be talking about reverse engineering and security using PowerShell. So it's going to be a very interesting day. I'm really looking forward to it. So some of the topics that you're going to be able to come and learn about, things like best practices. Obviously, Ed Wilson is going to be given a talk about best practices and the desired state configuration, which is all the rage in PowerShell 4, and talk about security and forensics, Active Directory, Exchange, a couple of vertical topics there, and so it'll be very interesting. So it does seem like we're having some people are not getting audio, some people are not getting visuals. So hopefully the recording's working, and you guys will be able to view all of this later. All right, another thing that we're doing at PowerShell Saturday 007 is we're having another official Iron Scripter event. This is something that the Charlotte user group started a couple years ago. We had our first official Iron Scripter competition at PowerShell Saturday 002, which also took place in Charlotte. And since then, we've had Iron Scripter competitions in Atlanta. We're having one at the PowerShell Summit later this year in Redmond. And again, we're having one next month in Charlotte. And this is, again, like a little mini scripting game where you get a sort of a set of requirements, and you have to fulfill those requirements, and whoever can do it the first or the best, or however the judging is done, is going to win a prize. Now, 2 years ago at 002, this was the prize. It was a handmade trophy. It was made by the husband of one of the user group members, who's a welding artist. And if you can't see it now, check it out later. But this thing weighs about 35 pounds, and again, handcrafted. John Tyler walked home with this 2 years ago, and I think it's still a permanent fixture on his desk. So we're having another Ego prize too. They're making another trophy for us this year, so it's going to be exciting again. So again, PowerShell Saturday 007 in Charlotte, North Carolina, February 8th. Highly recommend you check it out. Space is limited, and tickets are accelerating. The ticket sales are accelerating. So for a paltry $15 of your germ-ridden cash, you can reserve your own spot at 007 and come join all the fun that we're going to have. All right. So now that I've gotten that little spiel out of the way, we can get on to the presentation proper. And the first thing that I want to point out, you've probably noticed already, is that these slides are branded for Pluralsight. And if you're not familiar with Pluralsight, they do a lot of online training. You've probably heard about them. They recently acquired TrainSignal, PeepCode, and some other training organizations. But they have a really nice collection of PowerShell courses as well. And in fact, what you're watching here now is part of a course that I did for them last year. So I'm going to be showing you some of the gotchas that I cover in the course, and we'll leave some of them for later if you want to watch the course yourself. Let's get started. The first thing that I want to address is this notion of gotcha. What do I mean when I say gotcha? Well, if you listen to people like Jeff Snover or Don Jones talk about PowerShell and how PowerShell is built, they refer to this PowerShell mantra. And it's a very simple thing where you think something, you type the thing, and then you get the thing. And then you go back to thinking about the next thing that you need, right? So again, you think about what you want, you type it at the console, and then you get that thing. And now you're ready to start thinking about the next thing that you're going to need to solve your problem. So a gotcha isn't a bug, right? A gotcha is what happens when the cycle breaks down, but it breaks down in a very specific way. Right? So let's say if the cycle broke down like in the typing and the getting, right? If one of those things was broken, that would be an honest-to-God bug inside of PowerShell, right? You would have a problem with PowerShell that would need to be addressed by the development team. But gotchas are very different. These are problems with the way that you're thinking about PowerShell itself. So PowerShell is working exactly the way it's supposed to be working, but your understanding of how it's supposed to be working is broken. So these are kind of like bugs inside of your brain, and that's how you should think about gotchas. That's what these are. So, and seriously, some of the things I'm going to show you today, you're going to think that they're bugs, but once we sort of elaborate on why they're behaving that way, you'll be convinced that they're really not, that's exactly how PowerShell is supposed to be working. So without further ado, let's move on to gotcha number 1, which I call tilde. So here I have my ISE. Allow me to. All right. So the title of this gotcha is tilde, like I said. For those of you who have come from a Linux background, may understand that tilde has a very special meaning in Linux, in the shell, and it has a very special meaning inside of PowerShell as well. I have a request to increase the font size. And how does that look? So yeah, that looks pretty good. Right. So inside of PowerShell, if I run a get item, and I pass tilde in as the path parameter, I get back a very specific path. I get back the path C whack users, or C : whack users beefarino, and that is like my home directory, right? That is where my user beefarino, that's my username, that is where all of my stuff is. So if I look in here, you can see your sort of standard your standard suspects like documents and downloads. That's my Dropbox folder, desktop, etc. Right? And if you're familiar with Linux, you probably understand. You have experience with the fact that tilde is also something very special in Linux as well. So no matter where you go inside of the Linux shell, tilde sort of references your home directory again. And no matter how lost you get, you can always just like cd tilde and get back to that home directory. So, right. So, and this makes tilde very useful. So if you're bouncing around the shell and you somehow get lost, like if I get lost in the root, I can just cd back to tilde, and that would be a great way to get back home. So what's the gotcha here? Well, here's the thing, right? So PowerShell has a whole bunch of drives, right? And so we have a C drive and a D drive and an F drive here, and these are all file system drives. But I have other types of drives too, right? So, for example, I have this HKCU drive, and if I look around on this drive, one of the things you're going to notice is that this isn't a file system. This is actually my registry. So, PowerShell has, this is one of my favorite features of PowerShell, by the way, is this what we call the provider model. And these providers sort of expose these hierarchical data systems like registries and your certificate stores in your environment as drives, so that you can treat them like files and folders on your file system. So again, I have this drive, and it's very useful and it's very handy. But here's the problem, right? If I do a get item tilde on my HKey current users drive, I actually get back a nasty error, right? This is one of the things I love about PowerShell too, is the fact that the errors are generally speaking very elaborate and they're very explanatory. So, like in this case, it's telling me right here that the home location for this provider is not set. So, what exactly is a home location? What does it have to do with tilde? And what do those two things have to do with providers? Here we have 4 drives. These are all PowerShell drives. Let's say we have the C drive and the D drive and the HKCU and HKLM drives, which are both registry drives. Right? So file system drives here in orange, registry drives here in blue, are actually backed by 2 different providers inside of PowerShell. So the file system provider provides the means to interact with files and folders, and the registry provider gives me the ability to interact with registry hives and keys and values. And providers are really great. Like I said, they're my favorite feature. They do have some limitations though. So just really quickly, the file system provider, for example, allows you to copy items between drives. Let's say, so I can take a file from the D drive and move it to C, and that's an acceptable thing to do. What I can't do is take something like, a file from my documents folder on C and try to copy it to the registry. Those cross-provider operations like that just aren't supported. There's no way for the two providers to communicate. They don't understand their paths. They don't understand the storage mechanisms, etc. So in that sense, these are very isolated things, right? You have groups of drives that can interact, and you have groups of drives that can't. So what does this have to do with tilde and home? Well, each provider actually has its own interpretation of what tilde means. So what happens is the file system provider has its own notion of what home is, and the registry provider has a very different notion of what home is. So when given that and the fact that you can't have cross-provider operations like I was describing before, sort of leads you to the conclusion that tilde is going to be different, depending on which provider you are using at the current time. That is, that you will never have a stable value for tilde. It will change depending where you are in the shell. So, and in fact, if we go back to this error and take a closer look at it, it actually tells you how to fix it, right? So here's the second or third sentence in here is, to set the home location, execute this little snippet of code, right? So before I do that, one thing that I do want to point out, if I run the git ps provider commandlet, this gives me a list of all the providers on my system. And you can see how, there's the file system and the registry, right? But there's other ones that deal with PowerShell internals and things like that. The one thing I want to show you though is if I do git provider and I select like the name and the home location, the thing I want to point out is that the only provider inside of PowerShell that by default has any value for home is actually the file system provider. So none of the other providers that ship with PowerShell define this home value. That doesn't mean that you can't define it though. Like I said, the error tells you exactly what to do. In this case, I can get the provider name, which is registry in this case, and set the home property to some value. Like let's say I'll set it to the path HT current user : wax software, let's say. Right. And now that I've set that value inside of the session and I do get item tilde, I actually get back that path in the registry, and now I can use tilde with the registry, the user registry, and this works. What's the big deal, right? So sometimes tilde will work and sometimes it won't. Well, let me show you a quick example here. I don't actually want to execute this, so what I'm going to do is just put this into a script file. Here's a very innocuous example. All right, this is a script. I might save this and run it and try to share it with somebody. dir gives me a list of all the things in the current directory, and I pipe that stuff to copy item, and I say, I want these things copied to this destination, which is home whack documents whack things. Now, intuitively, I understand this to mean I want to copy whatever these things are, wherever my current location is, to my home folder in my documents area in a folder named things. The problem is, if I run that from here, it's going to fail, and it's going to fail pretty nasty, simply because there is no documents whack things folder inside of my registry. So again, that's an innocuous example of something that would fail, but not cause any damage. Now let's look at another example here. Again, this might be a script that I save and share with someone. And the idea here is that I want to find all of the executable files inside of my home folder, anywhere inside the home folder, and delete them. So that's basically what this command means. Now the problem is, the tilde, the value there, is configurable by the user, and you have no idea where that path is pointing at this point. This makes tilde very fragile, and I tend to use, you'll see me use it on the shell all the time. You'll see me cd to tilde all the time on the shell because that's my shell, and I'm working in there, and I know that. Inside of a script, I never use tilde, and I've learned this the hard way. I don't use tilde inside of scripts, and this is why, because you never know where it's pointing. Someone could have redirected it to a different folder, and the intent of your script suddenly is completely bonkers. It's never going to do what you expect it to do. So that's the gotcha. And how do you get around it? Well, like I said, tilde is fragile, so don't use it. And instead of tilde, use this automatic variable $home. And $home is always set to the location that tilde points to on the file system. So, but the nice thing is that it doesn't change wherever you go inside of the little PowerShell file system here. So if I go to my certificate stores and look around, and then I want to go back home, I can cd $home, and I get back to the file system itself. I don't get a nasty error that home is not defined. So again, $home is a much better choice than tilde, especially inside of scripts, because this meaning isn't going to change from user to user. So there's other things you can do too if you are a glutton for punishment and enjoy using the .NET Framework directly. Excuse me. You can do something like this. You can use the get folder path static method on the environment type and pass in the name of the folder that you're looking for. In this case, I'm looking for the My Documents folder, and you'll get back a string that contains the path to that special folder. And there's a whole list of these special folders. You can find them on MSDN. So you can do things like history and cookies and things like that. So it's very useful, very useful. Okay, so that's tilde, and I'm going to give you guys a second to ask any, excuse me, to ask any questions inside of the chat window while I take a quick drink before I move on to the next gotcha. Well, in that case, let's move on to gotcha, which I call your current location versus your current directory. So, I'm going to go into my documents folder, and what I want you to notice there is that my prompt changed, right? So I started out in my home folder, C:\, CD is into documents, and now my location has changed inside of PowerShell. I'm now inside of C:\, users, whack documents, right? And this is kind of an intuitive thing that we all understand, that this location inside of PowerShell follows us around. So if I bounce back, it follows me back, and the prompt changes. And so I'm always getting this feedback that my current location inside of PowerShell is changing. And there's other commandlets you can use to play with it too, like get location will tell you where you are, or the pwd automatic variable is another very handy way to get that path. And not like pwd, because you can use it inside of strings, right? So you can say, pwd/documents, or what have you. Right? So, and you can change your location too. There's other things you can like set location into your documents folder, right? And PowerShell uses these, your current location to resolve paths. So in this case, let's say I'm I want to look inside of one of these folders, and let's say look inside of the Arduino folder, right? I can do ls : or .dat whack Arduino, right? And PowerShell understands that when I say dot, oh yeah, you mean this path, and I can figure out you want to take a listen to the Arduino folder that's inside of that documents folder, right? So that is how that is worked. That is the path to resolve based on the current location inside of the shell. And again, if you've used PowerShell frequently, this is something that's kind of intuitive for you. So now let's make it not intuitive, right? Let's create a new thing. I'll use a new item commandlet, and I'm going to create something called foo from PowerShell.txt. And of course, this will be a file, and the value will be hello from PowerShell. Right, and that worked as expected, right? I have, I gave it this relative path, foo from PowerShell.txt, and PowerShell said, oh, you obviously meant to create that wherever you are now, your current location, which is C:\, users, whack beefarino, whack documents, and there's your file, right? So if I do a listing for foo star inside of the current folder, there it is, right? I know it exists. Now let's do the exact same thing, except this time we're going to use .NET directly. So in this case, I'm going to take the system.io.file type, and there's a static method in there called writeAltText. And I'm going to create a file named foo .net, and the content there will be hello again. So again, using .NET Framework directly, not the PowerShell commandlet, I'm creating a file using the writeAltText static method of system.io.file. And then the question is, right, where is that file? Right, so obviously I didn't get an error, and you know, so the question, where would that file have been written? And the sort of intuitive response is, well, wherever you are, wherever your current location is, which is c:\whack users, whack bfarino, whack documents. Right, now the problem is, if I do a dir star, or if I do a dir foo star looking for, you know, my two foo files that I just created, I can see foo from PowerShell, but I don't see foo from .NET. So the question to you guys is, where is the file? And if anybody has a guess, actually, I would love if anybody knows where this file is right now. I'll give you a second to dump it in the chat window. Oh, George has an idea. Let's see if he knows. And Greg, I will slow down. Yeah, so we got some, we have a guess. It's in c:\whack users whack bfarino, which is a really good guess. And Justin Zippy is saying it's in the start folder of PowerShell.exe, the working directory of the process. So again, there's that word, working directory, and that was in the title of this gotcha. So let's go back to the slides real quick and take a quick look. So there's two competing notions here inside of PowerShell, and the one that's most intuitive to us is this notion of a current location. And that current location is a PowerShell construct. That's the only place where that construct exists. And as you know, PowerShell is nothing but a Windows process, right? Just like every other Windows process that's running inside of your operating system. It has access to all the same features of that process that everyone else does. So every Windows process has a notion of a current directory. And the problem is that these two concepts are remarkably similar, but they have nothing to do with each other. And depending on how you're using these paths and what technologies you're using to translate these paths, you're going to end up with something very different. So let's walk through our example here. In the case of new item, we're using a PowerShell commandlet, and we're passing the relative path, in this example, foo.txt, to PowerShell. And PowerShell takes it and he goes, oh, you obviously want me to resolve this relative path, and I'll do that using the current location, right? Now, the current location follows you around the shell, right? So in this case, or in the case that we saw earlier, it was c:\whack users, whack bfarino, whack documents, whack foo.txt, right? And once PowerShell is done translating that path, it pumps it down to the .NET framework and the Windows API, has a full path to work with, and so nothing else has to happen. It just gets chewed up and the file gets created. Now let's look at the other case where we're sort of skipping PowerShell and using the .NET API directly. So in this case, PowerShell's out of the equation, right? We're just using it to invoke .NET. And it's not going to interpret this path for us. It's not going to get the chance to. Instead, that relative path gets dropped all the way down to the .NET framework. Well, the .NET framework is sitting on top of this Windows process and knows nothing about this current location inside of PowerShell. So when it sees this relative path, the process says, oh, you obviously want me to resolve that using the current directory. And in this case, the current directory is not the same thing as our current location. So it comes out to be a different location. So I think it was George Martin who said that the file was in c:\whack users whack bfarino, and he's correct. That is where when I started PowerShell, that was the current working directory for the Windows process, and so that's where the .NET framework ends up dropping the file. And that's how it happens, right? That's how you have the same relative path that can be interpreted two wildly different ways, depending on which technology you use to interpret it. All right, so just to prove the point, if I back up one and go into my home directory and take a look at foo star, there's foo from .NET, which I wrote just a few minutes ago. All right. So that's the gotcha. Like, so, this happens quite frequently to me, and it comes up very frequently. I use a lot of sort of what I would call legacy command line tools that are not familiar with this notion of a current location. So they'll write files, and the file won't be there where I think it should be. So I've learned to go look in this, the current directory to go find them. So a couple of things that I want to show you. The first is how to determine what the current directory is. Okay. And so the easiest way that I found is to access the current directory static property off of the environment class. And as you can see, that's actually returning my home folder to c:/whack users whack beefarino. Now, Greg, I don't hear a beeping either. And we have a question from Justin: is there a hook in the PowerShell run space when the run space working directory is set? And the answer to that, I don't think so. But I'll show you a workaround for this in just a second. So the first things first, though, this is how you get access. You figure out what the current directory is. And the nice thing is that this is actually a settable property, so you can manipulate the current directory as well. And this is just to highlight the problem, right? So if I go into my documents folder, the pwd variable is my current location. That's my PowerShell construct. But if I look at the current directory, it didn't follow me there, right? So the current directory is sort of stuck in this one place, and PowerShell isn't changing it for you. So what do we do about this? Well, one of the things that is really handy inside of PowerShell, one of the more powerful features, I think, or one of the funner features, I guess, is this prompt function. This prompt function is it's a function you can define that will return a string that PowerShell will use as the current prompt. So but the nice thing is you can cram any kind of logic you want to in there, and this becomes a way for you to inject a little bit of logic into PowerShell's workflow. So after it executes your command, your previous command, it needs to figure out what the prompt's going to be. So it'll ask your prompt function, what should the prompt be? And during that prompt function, you can execute any PowerShell you want. So what I like to do, or what I've done in the past, is added a little logic to my prompt function that looks like this. So I'm going to go ahead and run this, and I'm going to walk you through it really quickly. So I've redefined my prompt function, and we'll start at the end, and you'll notice that it's returning sort of the standard prompt, PS, and then whatever my current location is, and then the angle and space and the end. All right. The interesting thing is what happens before that prompt is returned. I have two statements here. The first one gets the current location on the file system provider. So I'm literally asking PowerShell, what is the current location for the file system provider? And then I get the full path for that location, and then I forcibly set the current directory for the process to that value. And the net effect of this is that as I bounce around the shell, my current location is being modified, but at the same time, the current directories now follow me around the file system as well. So as I bounce around, my current directory is constantly being updated after every command. So it's very useful to force PowerShell to manipulate that current directory. So all these legacy tools will drop their their files in the same relative path that PowerShell will. And the nice thing about this is, if I go into a different type of provider, like a certificate provider, it's not going to try to update the current directory that way. So it'll only do it for the file system provider, which is really the only place that makes sense. So. So anyway, back to our original example, if I go back to the C drive and go into Documents, and here I'm going to go ahead and create a new I'll create a new file bar from .net.txt. Now, before, this would have been written, this will still be written into the current directory for the process. But the nice thing now is that, the current directory is now corresponding to the current location. So it goes, the file ends up where I expect it to be. Very useful. The only drawback to this is that you have to have that prompt manipulation inside of your session. So again, if you're writing scripts and sharing them with people, you really have to understand how this is going to impact, or how the lack of this this prompt manipulation is going to impact them if they try to run your scripts, and things may not work the way they expect. So we have a question from Justin. Workaround doesn't work if you run a script that changes directory and then does CLR file IO. I'm not sure I follow, Justin. Can you elaborate a little bit while I set up the next demo? So, and we're going to move on to gotcha number 3 here in a second. So if you guys have any questions about current location and current directory, please ask them now.
Right, you can do that.
All right, Justin is typing along, and I'm going to follow up with him later and move on to gotcha number 3. All right, so gotcha number 3 is called expressing yourself in an argument. So you guys are probably familiar with the fact that PowerShell is really good at evaluating expressions for you. So if I say something like 5 minus 3, PowerShell knows, like, I want that to be interpreted, and it's going to give me the answer too, right? And I can do other things too, like you can say hello string, and I want it to concatenate it with the string world, and PowerShell says, oh, you obviously want me to combine those 2 strings into one big long string. I'm happy to help you with that. And so this, this expression evaluation is very useful, very powerful, and it can be used in some really interesting ways, right? So if I say this is some data, right, that's an expression, and I can pipe the results of that expression to, let's say, out file, and I'm going to pipe it to the file data.txt. Right. And then if I look at the content of data.txt, it contains that string. This is some data. And let's see. Yeah, by the same token, I can put other expressions in there as well. Like, if I want 3 plus 2, and again, if I look at the content, it's the content of the file is now the result of that expression being evaluated. Now, here's an interesting thing. If you look at the help for out file, and we look at the parameters for out file. There's this. There it is. There's this magical argument here, this magical parameter called input object, and this is actually, if you look at the help for this, it says, there's a section, does it accept pipeline input? And in fact, it does. It accepts it by value. And what that means is that, from the point of view of out file, any value you specify in the pipeline is equivalent to specifying it as this input object parameter, right? So, that previous expression, the idea is that we could take that previous expression, 5 minus 3 plus 2, and change it up a little bit to say, out file, that file path, and the input object is going to be 5 minus 3 plus 2, right? And when we do that, we get a little bit of an error, actually. So let me change this up a little bit. And it's not going to like that either. Oh, I did it wrong. Let's try something simpler. So instead of that long expression, which is being misinterpreted, I'll do something simple. I'll say 1 plus 1. Right? And by doing that, I would expect the content of data txt to be the number 2. Right? Unfortunately, when I actually look at the content inside of data.txt, I'm not getting 2, I'm actually getting the expression that I specified as the input object. And the question is why? The question is why is it if I specify the expression this way as pipeline input, I get the result I would expect, that the expression is evaluated and then the result of the expression is written to the file. Whereas if I express it this way as an input object, then the expression itself is written to the file. So I see some people chiming in the chat window. So before I give away the ending, let's take a closer look at what's happening inside of this pipeline. All right. So in this former case, the case that operated the way I would expect, we have 2 pipeline segments. We have the 1 plus 1, and the result of that, the pipeline is evaluated from left to right, and the result of the first expression, 1 plus 1, is evaluated to 2, and so the input to out file actually becomes the number 2, right? And the out file commandlet in this case has a single parameter, and that's the file path. So the number 2 is ended up being written to that file path. And if you look at the other example, and again, I see a lot of you guys have already picked up on the nature of the gotcha here. In the second case, we have just one pipeline segment, and instead of input, we actually have 2 parameters. And we have the file path parameter like we had before, but this time we have this input object parameter, and we specified an expression to that parameter. And the problem is that those expressions are not, we're past the point, or PowerShell, I guess, is past the point of evaluating expressions when it gets to the part where it's parsing out parameters for commandlets. So when it sees 1 plus 1, it's not seeing an expression. It's actually trying to help us out and assuming that, oh, you obviously meant that to be one long string of data. Let me write that to the file for you. This is not something that a lot of people would consider a gotcha, but I see a lot of people, especially new people to PowerShell, they've just started learning about pipelining, sort of don't understand why these things behave this way. So, and obviously the workaround of this gotcha is to use parentheses, and by surrounding the expression with parentheses, you sort of force PowerShell to see it first before it starts evaluating commandlets and parameters. And once you do that, right, then the expression is evaluated in the correct order, and you end up with the correct result inside of the file. So Greg is asking, can you define the data type? And that's a really good question. I don't know. So if I actually come in here and say something like that's an int, my guess is that the content of the expression actually contains the entire string that I'm trying to have evaluated. So the parentheses are really the key in that case, getting that to behave the way that you would expect it to. So I see Jacques is typing a message in the window. I'm going to give him a second. And there's also an issue with white space in the expression. I don't know if that's actually the case. If we change the expression to contain some white space, yeah, it actually does. It does cause it to break, and which is interesting because I don't remember that happening in PowerShell 2. But again, I tend to use pipeline more than parameters, so I could be wrong there. But very good. I'm glad that you guys picked up on that very quickly. All right. So try the true console. You can open up PowerShell. And again, this might be a little bit hard to read, but going to run the exact same command with this, and it's not going to like it. So, and just for for clarity, if I run PowerShell version 2 and try the same thing, it didn't work there either. So I must have just been misremembering that. All right. Very good, you guys. All right. So that was gotcha number 3, and we're going to skip gotcha 4. If you want to see gotcha 4, you can watch the course on Pluralsight. Gotcha number 5 is one of my favorites, and I call it iterating nothing. So one thing I do want to point out is that I am running PowerShell version 3 for all of these demos. And this gotcha has sort of like a double impact because the behavior in PowerShell 3 is different than PowerShell 2. So we'll go into a little bit of detail about what exactly the differences are. But for now, let's just say that I have a variable f that I've set to the contents of the current directory, right? So if I do $f, it's the list of files and folders in my current directory, right? So I can do things like for each file in f, and I want to do a string. This file is, and then whatever the name is. All right. And the result, I get back a list of strings that this file is, and then whatever the file name is, right? So terribly useful. And of course, I can I can reverse that. I can say f, and I want to pipe it to for each object to accomplish basically the functional same thing. And I get back the same results whether I'm using the for each object in a pipeline or the for each statement on the console. So we have a question from Greg, why double quotes and not single quotes? And just real quick, we're actually going to actually talk about quotes in a little bit, but the single quotes actually prohibit interpolation. So the results of that, the $under not evaluated as a variable, it's evaluated as literal. So that is why I was using double quotes. So, all right. So again, that's iterating a value there. F, it contains a list of files. Now let's look at A. $A has no value. Right. So let's see what happens if I do for each item in A, which I just showed you has absolutely no value, and I just want to output the string iteration, right? And I get nothing. I get nothing back, right? Which makes sense, right? How can you iterate over something that has no value? Doesn't make any sense, right? And so by extension, I should be able to do this, right? Pipe A to for each object, and for each value in A, output the string iteration. And when I run this, something different happens. It actually iterates once. And again, this is actually very similar to the previous gotcha that we looked at, expressing yourself in an argument. But the question is, what's happening here? Why is it that, how can you iterate nothing in a pipeline, but you can't iterate nothing inside of a for each statement? So let's look at the broken case, right? Because the other case makes sense, right? It seems very obvious why for each item in this variable that has no value wouldn't actually do anything, right? The important thing to understand is why this particular case in the pipeline, it actually is iterating one time. So in this case, we have two pipeline segments. We have $A, which is a variable, and then that value is being piped to the for each object commandlet. And George is asking a question. For each and for each object are different constructs, and indeed they are. So in this case, like this first example here that I'm highlighting, the for each item in A is a single statement inside of PowerShell. That entire block, from the for each all the way to the end curly bracket, is one single statement. Whereas the second one is a pipeline that's composed of two statements, the $A and then the for each object commandlet. So they are different constructs, but they're functionally very similar. So in this broken case, we have $A is the first segment of the pipeline, which gets evaluated first. So when PowerShell sees $A is not defined, and PowerShell doesn't have any real notion of an undefined value, right? The closest equivalent it has is this value null. And we use null in .NET all the time as a way to represent a variable that's declared but has no value. And that's what PowerShell does. It says, oh, $A is not defined, so I'm just going to call it null. The problem is null isn't exactly nothing. Null is something. It's sort of the expression of the absence of any value. So instead of not passing anything down the pipeline, PowerShell passes the value null down to the for each object commandlet. And the result of that is for each object now has a single value in its input to iterate on. Now that value is null, But for each object says, hey, it's input, I'm going to process it. And so it ends up executing one iteration over that single value null. And again, this can be kind of a difficult concept to grasp, this concept of null and nothing and how they're similar and different. So I have a little example I want to run here. I'm going to define two functions inside of my session. And this first one is called getNothing. And getNothing literally returns nothing. It does nothing. It returns no value. The second one I'm going to call getNull. And it returns a single value. And that value is the value null. All right, so if I actually execute getNothing, I get back nothing. If I execute getNull, again, I get back nothing. Nothing gets output to the console because PowerShell will end up ignoring that null as part of the output. But what's interesting is if you look at the behavior on the pipeline, if I use getNothing as the commandlet that provides input to for each object, nothing happens, right? And that's because nothing's being output to the pipeline. But if I replace getNothing with getNull, I'm back to that sort of broken pattern where I'm iterating once, even though I don't really have a value on the pipeline outside of null that I want to iterate. So, and here's the fun part, right? So, so you have this dichotomy in PowerShell 3 about how the for each statement and for each object are behaving. But let's go back and look at PowerShell 2. Right? So I just opened a console and I used the version parameter of PowerShell to start a different version of PowerShell. And I'm going to go ahead and run the same thing again. I'm going to say $A, which has no value. Right? And I want to pipe that to for each object. And for every object in A, I want you to execute an iteration. And it actually executes that iteration once. And then if I change it up for each item in A, you'll notice that the for each statement is actually behaving the exact same way as the for each object. So whereas, I've got the ISE open in the background here, for each and the for each statement and the for each object differ in the way they behave. That's actually a sort of a breaking change or a breaking fix, I guess is what they call it, from PowerShell 2, where both of these things, the for each object commandlet and the for each statement, actually behaved very, very different. And in fact, let me just jump ahead. So, the point here is that you've got this sort of grid now that you have to keep track of. When you've got null on the pipeline and you're using for each object and for each across different versions of PowerShell, PowerShell 2, both of these things, for each object and the for each statement, they both iterate null. And whether that's correct or not, I think that's debatable, but at least it's consistent. I think is the good thing there. Whereas in PowerShell 3, you have for each object which will iterate it and the for each statement which won't, which I find kind of distressing. Right? I would rather have something that I would rather have the behavior be the same across everything and just sort of understand that null values are going to be iterated. So you have to sort of watch for that. One workaround that not workaround, but one of the more useful ways to get around this is to use this set strict mode commandlet, and you specify whatever version of PowerShell you're running. In this case, I'll say version 3. And what that does is, I'm not going to enable it now because it's actually going to break some of the other demos that I'm going to do. But what that does is it prohibits you from making sort of silly mistakes like using an undefined variable A. It'll actually bark at you that if you try to, like if in these examples, if I tried to use A, it would have come back to me and said that variable's not defined. In fact, I can just specify in this console. So now I've enabled strict mode inside of my session, and if I go ahead and try to reference variable A, PowerShell actually considers that an error. It says you can't retrieve A because A has not been set. I would have to explicitly say define that variable a is null, in which case PowerShell will let me use it, or more appropriately, I would probably give it some value, and then PowerShell would let me use it. So set strict mode is a very useful thing to avoid making these kinds of silly mistakes, and there's lots of other things that it protects you from as well. And it's there by design. So highly recommend, if you're not familiar with it, to go ahead and get help on set strict mode. So I'll give you guys a second while I take a drink to ask any last minute questions about iterating nothing. All right, nice job. Keep going. Yep, can do. All right. All right, so this is gotcha number 6. This one is called foreign dialects. So, all right. I have a special folder here. It's called, yeah. All right. So I have this folder dialects for this demo, and it's full of these files, and the files sort of follow this naming convention where you have like a string of characters and a dash, and then a string of numbers, and then the extension .txt. And let's say that we are tasked with the the notion of renaming these files. We got to change the convention so that the numbers come first. So like for example, this last one, the name would be 95-zxcv.txt, and it's not sort of uncommon, but not hard either. So I would use regular expressions to solve this problem. And in fact, let's see, I'm going to go ahead and let's see, the get item one's probably named 99.txt. Yeah, so there's a file. I'm going to go ahead and grab that one inside of a variable. So it'll be $str will contain a reference to that file. And in fact, I don't want the file. I want the name of the file alone. I just want a string with there it is. So now I have this string variable str that contains the name of the file that I want to process. And now I'm going to come up with a regular expression that I can use to process the bits of this file. I want to capture this first part, the TAG letters, and the second part, the 99, and figure out where the dash is and things like that. So I'm pretty good with regular expressions, so I'm just going to see if I can't figure it out. Let's see, we want to capture the letters A to Z, and we want to capture that. So I put those in parentheses. And then there's going to be a dash, and then I want to capture some digits, right? And if you don't know regular expressions, don't worry. This is just I've been using them for like 15 years, so they're sort of ingrained in my brain. Again, get help about regular expressions. We'll tell you everything you need to know to get started. See some questions. Why did you have to expand? Select dash expand will actually isolate that property, that single property, and return its value. Instead of just returning an object that also has a name property set to that value, Greg. So that is why I did that. And Jacques is asking, do we include any info on PowerShell SQL Server? Not in this presentation. So, but however, if you do want some resources, Jacques, contact me. I have a lot of friends in that space. So. All right, so anyway, I have this regular expression, and I'm going to go ahead and run it, and it comes back and says true. That's definitely a match. That's good. So I'm going to go ahead and look at this magic matches variable, and so it matched, but it didn't do it correctly. So I want to capture the numbers, or the letters, but I want to capture all the letters. And then if I look at matches, that looks right. Okay, so now here's my my original file name, tag-99, and I've managed to capture the different parts. I have the first grouping is tag, and the second grouping is the 99. So I've kind of got this regular expression now that I can use to rename some of these files. So let's try it out. if I take my my string, instead of doing a match, I'll do a replace. And I'll take that regular expression, and the replacement expression will be something like, well, I want the numbers to come first, so I'll take the second group, which in the .NET regular expression lingo is $2, with a dash followed by $1, which would be the first group that I captured, the letters. So in a nutshell, I have this regular expression, which is going to capture all the letters as group 1, and then in the substitution expression, that's the $1 will be, the idea is that the $1 will be replaced by the value of that capture, and then again, here we have the second group that I captured, which is the digits, and I want those to come first in the replacement expression. So by inspection, this should work. The problem is when I run it, I don't get back the replacement expression that I thought I was going to get. Now the regular expression worked. I tested it. It worked. So something must be wrong with the replacement expression. And I'm willing to bet that some of you have already figured out what it is. But for those of you who haven't, let's walk through it and see what's going on. So we have this this regular expression and replacement expression that we're working with, and we have two strings here. We have the regular expression, which is shown in purple, if you can see the purple color, and we have the replacement expression, which is shown in green. And we have two layers of technology here. We have PowerShell, which is going to get first crack at looking at both of these strings. And an interesting thing happens when PowerShell chews up these strings. So the first string, nothing changes. There's nothing in there that PowerShell says, oh, I need to process that. However, when PowerShell sees that replacement expression, the $2 and $1 look an awful lot like variables, and in fact, that's how PowerShell is interpreting them. Right? So what happens is PowerShell chews up these strings, and then the .NET regular expression library is being used sort of behind PowerShell, and PowerShell's passing it these strings, and we have absolutely no hope of these expressions actually coming out and working the way that we want. And this, this is not a common problem just with regular expressions, but if you use any kind of text-based technology like SQL or WMI, regular expressions, or even LDAP URLs, you're sort of always fighting this battle. You're trying to get these strings to interface with the underlying technology, but you've got PowerShell sitting in the middle. And so you've got to be very aware of how PowerShell is viewing these strings that you're passing around, and whether or not PowerShell is going to take liberties with those strings in their interpretation. So, for example, in this case, what's the fix? Earlier in this session we were talking about single versus double quotes, and I said that single quoting a string tells PowerShell that you don't want it to be interpolated at all. So the simplest way to do this, and again, this is when I'm using regular expressions in particular, or if I'm passing strings down to any underlying technology like SQL, I will use single quoted strings almost exclusively unless I want PowerShell to do some interpolation on my behalf. So again, in this case, if I use the single quotes around the replacement expression, the whole thing suddenly works, right? PowerShell is no longer interpreting those strings on my behalf. So again, with the single quotes, we have two strings. In this case, when PowerShell sees the replacement expression, it sees the single quotes and says, oh, I'm going to leave that alone, and I'm going to pass that straight down to the regular expression library as is. And so you have this really positive experience now because PowerShell isn't munging your strings for you. So, all right. And let's see. So another thing you can do, if you must use some interpolation, like, for example, let's say I want to rename the file, let's say I want the computer name dumped inside of, let's do that. So I want the computer name followed by a dash followed by replacement expressions, right? What I can do is use these little backticks, which are right under the tilde. on your keyboard. And this is PowerShell's escape character, right? So by doing that, PowerShell says, oh, you want this dollar to be literal, and so I'm not going to mess with it. Whereas, this dollar has no literal, so it says, oh, you obviously want me to interpret this as a variable name, in which case PowerShell is more than happy to oblige. So you sort of get this mix and match feature set where you can sort of use some interpolation and then force PowerShell to stop interpolating certain characters inside the string. And again, I'm not going to walk through that because you guys have seen that. So, and again, this comes up all the time inside of PowerShell. String is sort of the king when it comes to automation. Everything that we do is expressed through strings of some sort. So, like for example, this is actually a valid LDAP URL for one of my local forests here at CodeEls, and you'll notice that it's actually got this / in it. That if you don't escape it, active directory is going to blow up. So again, we have two layers of technology here. We have PowerShell and ADSI. PowerShell doesn't care about the string, but when ADSI sees it, it throws this little hissy fit, about the forward whack inside of the developers / QA name. So you want to escape it. Well, you got to be careful there too. I can escape it with a backtick, like I did in this example. And PowerShell says, oh, let me interpret that character literally for you, but then ADSI gets the same exact string, and so it's not PowerShell we have to escape that character for. PowerShell is fine with that character. It's ADSI that we need to focus on, ignoring that character, and so we have to use the ADSI escape character, which is the back whack, And again, finally, ADSI will give us the thumbs up and let us continue on our merry little way. So. All right, so I see Greg's typing a message. Excellent, didn't know that. Good. Well, I'm glad. I'm glad you learned something. So, okay. Let's see. We're at gotcha number 8, and I think there's 9. We go to 8 and 9, I think. Which one is 8? Oh, yeah. This one's called or and. So, this one is probably not going to affect a lot of you. Unless you've been developing in other languages outside of PowerShell. However, this one is remarkably interesting to look at because it's one of those, the first time you see it, you kind of think, what? That can't be right. So I'm gonna type when you have very complicated expressions with properties and quotes and addition and parentheses and pipelines, you understand how those things are going to be interpreted and the order that they're going to be interpreted. So what's interesting and what's relevant to the current gotcha is this line right here that I've highlighted in orange, where you have three operators, and, or, and XOR, which is short for exclusive OR. And what's interesting, when you break this out, when you have operators on the same level of precedence, PowerShell and most other languages will evaluate them from left to right. So let's see what happens based on that knowledge that or and are at the same level of precedence in PowerShell. So we evaluate them from left to right. And in this case, the leftmost operand is OR. And so we look at that expression, true or true, and that evaluates to true. And so we're left with true and false, which evaluates to false, right? And so that's a very clear explanation of why PowerShell thinks that these things, or this expression, true or true and false, comes out to the value false. So what makes PowerShell unique, and why does it not behave the way every other language does? Well, the truth of the matter is every other language actually breaks up these three operators into different levels of precedence. So like languages like C#, JavaScript, for example, and has higher precedence over exclusive OR, which has higher precedence over OR. And when you take that into consideration, you end up with a very different interpretation of that same expression. So instead of evaluating left to right, we have a different set of rules, and has to be evaluated first. So it's the second part of the expression, true and false, which ends up being false. And then we're left with the lower precedented OR operator, and that expression, true or false, actually evaluates to true. And so that's how it happens, right? You have PowerShell and these other languages that define the operator precedence differently. And so they end up evaluating logical expressions in very different ways. So a couple of things that I wanted to convey to you about this. And again, this isn't something that I would expect a lot of you to hit. It comes up for me quite frequently, more often than, often enough that I would, comment on it to you guys, I guess. But I'm getting a question. Did Snover justify this decision? Yes, I will, and I think I understand why. So again, just remember, and or have the same level of precedence, right? And I found one place in the universe where there's another case of a language or a shell that actually does the same thing, right? So in this list, we have similar and dissimilar, and every language that exists except for Bash falls in the dissimilar category. So the only case I can find where a language actually has the same type of precedence with and or as PowerShell is the Linux Bash shell. And I think that's why, right? So if you think about how these operators are used on Bash, you're typically running programs, parsing output or checking for output, and that's the result of your logical operation. And so the logical expressions inside of Bash, you might want to behave. You might want PowerShell to behave in a similar fashion, and I think that's where that comes from. I can't verify whether that's true or not, but my guess is that that's what it is. It's the simplification, or it's part of that sort of flattening and that simplification that the team did with PowerShell to sort of take it out of the realm of it's a scripting language, it's a programming language, but it just works in a much simpler way, so you don't have to remember as many things. Which I just find that very interesting, that Bash is the only other place on the planet I can find that evaluates that expression the same way. All right. So I think this is my favorite one of all time. So ask any questions you have about operator precedence and the or and gotcha while I set up the demo for gotcha number 9. And gotcha number 9 is called unequal equality. All right, I see no questions. I'm going to go ahead with the next demo. Okay, let's define a couple variables. I'm going to define A. Let's say A is 0, and let's make B equal to an empty string. Right? So A is 0, B is an empty string. So if I do something like an expression like A equals B, right? So I'm asking PowerShell to tell me logically, does the value in A equal the value in B? And PowerShell says yes. Yes, they do. They're equal values, which kind of makes sense, even though one's a number and one's a string, right? Because 0 means no value for a number, and empty string means no value for a string, right? And again, that kind of makes sense, that loosely typed, scripty kind of thing that PowerShell does. So here's the part that absolutely blows me away. If I reverse those and say, well, if A equals B, then $B must equal $A, right? Well, no, PowerShell says no, absolutely not. An empty string does not equal the number 0, right? And so the question is, before we get into the why, the thing that, like, this just looks broken, doesn't it? I mean, it looks like, what? How could this possibly be the case, right? I mean, literally, like, if you think about this is like the only place in the universe where you can say something like this, right? That the value A equals B is different than the value B equals A, right? That's true. How could that possibly be true? There shouldn't be a place in the universe where that could happen, right? So the first time I saw this, I'm like, bug. And then once I started digging into it, I realized what was happening, and I realized it's not a bug, although it's pretty insidious. So the question is, again, what is going on here? Why does the order of your operands matter when you're testing for equality inside of PowerShell? So let's find out. Well, I see George is talking about type, and you are on the right path, George. So let's look at what happens in this case, where $A equals $B, and remember, PowerShell thinks that this is true, right? So keep that in mind. So we have values for $A and $B, and A is the number 0, and B is an empty string. So something interesting happens here. PowerShell, it's not officially a typed language, and yet it's built on the .NET framework. It's a very shallow layer on top of the .NET framework. So type constantly comes up, and you have two different types here. You have a number and a string. And since the number comes first, right, PowerShell says, okay, that's what we're comparing against. Let's look at the second thing, which is a string. Now, how do I interpret an empty string as a number? And PowerShell has this built-in type conversion system, which is actually really awesome and really powerful. And it says, oh, an empty string as a number is the number 0, right? So now we have an expression 0 equals 0. And of course, that comes out to true, right? That's obvious why that should be true. And again, if I go back to the console, I can actually verify this. So I have B, if I pipe it to get member, you can see that B is a string, right? So it's officially a string. However, I just cast it to an integer. I get back the number 0. So you can actually access this type conversion feature directly inside of PowerShell just by casting it. That's the exact same thing that's happening inside of the logical expression. So now let's look at the broken case, or what I would consider the broken case. $B equals $A. And then again, remember, PowerShell thinks that this is false. So let's figure out why. So $B is an empty string, and $A is the number 0. And again, we have this left to right thing going on where the first value is of type string. So PowerShell says, oh, you obviously want me to take the second value and interpret it as a string when I do the comparison. Well, looking at the number 0, trying to the equivalent to the number 0 inside of a string really isn't an empty string, right? 0 is a value, and expressing that as a string would actually be a string containing the character 0. And when you look at it this way, it makes a whole lot of sense why PowerShell would actually think that this expression should be false. Because an empty string and a string with a character in it couldn't possibly be equal to each other. Right? And again, A is a number, and if I type A to get member, you can see that it's an integer. Just to clarify, if I do the little type conversion and to get member, you can see that PowerShell is more than happy to translate it to the string type. And in this case, it's still the number is 0, but it's expressed as a string instead of an integer. Right, so that is sort of that explanation of why order matters inside of these comparative operators. The interesting thing about this type conversion, it's very specific to PowerShell. There's no equivalent inside of the .NET framework. So, for example, there's this convert class that has a ton of static methods that I can use to change types from one to another. And so, like, I can take the 232-bit integer class, and I can take my empty string and try to convert it to an integer, and it's just .NET blows up. It has absolutely no idea what to do with an empty string and how to interpret it as a number. So that conversion that PowerShell is doing of an empty string to the number 0 is very specific to PowerShell. It's not something you're going to find just spread across the .NET framework. So, this is not limited to numbers and strings, right? There's actually some very interesting cases, especially involving null. So what I'm going to do is do a new expression here. If I do $null equals $null, that should be no surprise. That's true, right? That because a null reference and a null reference are the same thing, right? And that's great, except unless the second null reference happens to be a null string, in which case, no, those things are totally not equal to each other. Again, I don't understand why this is false and the previous one is true, just because one happens to be a string and the other one has, it's basically an object. But the interesting thing here is that there's almost no concept of a null string inside of PowerShell. So if you have other things like .NET libraries, so we have Greg asking, put the string first and try again. Okay. So we have the string null equals null, and I bet this one ends up, oh, nope, that's false too. That's interesting. Just to double check to make sure we've got our order operations correct. So, yeah, I know, Greg, I'm verklempt too. I don't exactly know why. My guess is that, well, anyway. So this interaction between null object references and null string references kind of crops up in a really, really evil way. So I'm gonna drop some code into my console here and walk you through it real quick. I'm using this add type commandlet, which I think shipped with PowerShell 2, and it basically allows you to write some C# code and have it be compiled into your session. So in this case, I've defined a class named equality that has a single static method, test null string, and I pass in a string to test null string, and one of three things happens. So either the string is null, in this case, I get back the string null, null, to indicate that that's what the value was interpreted as. Otherwise, the string is empty, in which case I get back the label empty. And if it's anything else, I just get back whatever string I ended up passing in. So, once I run that, I can actually reference that. So I have the equality type, and I have the test null string method. And just to give me an example, like if I pass in the string example, I get back the string example, and if I pass in an empty string, I get back a string that says empty, right? And so that's what's happening, is that the string's sort of passing through this method and being interpreted, and the method is returning specific values depending on what value is passed in. Now here's the interesting thing, right? What happens if I pass in null or string? Now the .NET programmer in me says, well, a null reference coming in here should execute this case where null equals string and I get back the string null. Unfortunately, that's not what happens, because PowerShell is sitting in between, and PowerShell says, oh, you're passing in null and I need to interpret null as a string. So let me go ahead and make that an empty string. That way everything will work the way you would expect it to. Greg's asking, what about using double quotes? I'm not sure that double quotes are going to help you here. So you can't. So yeah, null is actually a variable reference and not a string reference. So if I actually put, let's see what you're saying. So if I put null around inside of double quotes, so null would actually be interpreted. I don't know what will happen. Yeah, it'll come back as an empty string in that case as well. But that was a good question. It took me a second to figure out what you were shooting at, but that was a really good question. So yeah, so this, the insidious thing here is that, we have .NET components and COM components that we use all the time inside of PowerShell, and sometimes we don't even know that we're using them. And when you try to pass a null string to these controls, then they end up getting an empty string, and sometimes they behave very differently in that regard. So you got to be careful. I try to give you guys walkaways from each of these gotchas, and this one it makes sense, right, once you understand it, but in terms of how to deal with it on a day-to-day basis, the only thing I can suggest is you always keep track of your types, always keep track of what types your variables are, and test those logical comparisons before you run off before you run off making assumptions that it's just going to work. Because this one is pretty insidious, especially if you're not paying attention and you're just sort of comparing two values. You can get very different results depending on the order of the values. So, and that is basically the end of the presentation. So there's a couple more gotchas in the course, and again, if you go to Perl site and watch the course, you can see those as well. And in fact, there's 9 gotchas in the course, and there's a 10th one that I'm going to be presenting at PowerShell Saturday. So if you want to see, and again, it's another typing thing. So if you want to come see that one, you got to buy a ticket to the show, guys. So I'll stick around for a little bit. If you guys have any questions, more than happy to answer them. And again, get that slide up again. So if you guys want to contact me again. If you have any PowerShell questions, anything, I'm more than happy to help you guys with questions if you're trying to get something working, whatever. Easiest way to find me again is on Twitter as Beaverino, but any of these other ways will work as well. So, all right. Well, I appreciate the kudos and getting in the chat window, and like I said, I'll stick around for a second and answer any questions.